It's been reported that the Small Business Administration is effectively cutting off grants to Minnesota effective immediately, according to SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler, in response to those widespread reports of fraud in the state. Now, Liz, it seems like this is just the beginning. What are your thoughts of how we get here? How did this happen in your state? And is the SBA doing the right thing here?
Yeah, the feds, as you said, have put the fraud total now at $9 billion, TW. The calls for Governor Tim Walz to resign, they seem to be getting louder by the day in the wake of all this fraud. I want to make something clear, however. It's frustrating to admit, but this truly has been very out in the open and widely reported for years in Minnesota. I think many taxpayers are happy now that the federal government seems to be paying attention. We actually saw today the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They have agents on the ground in Minnesota. We saw some video tweeted earlier today conducting site visits, but we have stories dating back nearly a decade of fake daycares, fake autism sites, fake adult daycares, millions of dollars in cash, in carry-on luggage flying out of our airport here, the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. But again, with this glare now of the national spotlight, the question remains, will it stop? Will something change? There seems to be 5 or 6 ongoing investigations here announced just within the last few weeks, TW.
Well, to your point about, can we expect change? We do know that federal authorities have taken notice of Nick Shirley's expose. In fact, FBI Director Kash Patel, he says the multi-million-dollar fraud uncovered in Minnesota is, quote, just the tip of the very large iceberg, claiming that the agency has even added personnel and investigative resources to the land of 10,000 lakes to continue the crackdown. So it sounds like the federal government is taking notice, but they're doing it because of what Nick's reporting has done. But he also claims that convicted Somali scammers are going to face denaturalization and deportation. I guess my question to you, Liz, do you see the FBI following through in these investigations? And in your opinion, who also should be investigated? I mean, I see online a lot of people are questioning whether or not Governor Walz, has some culpability here about what he knew, when he knew it, and why he failed to act.
Yeah, it sounds like he will be called to D.C. to answer some of those questions. But we've been tracking campaign donations that have been made to many campaigns, including our Attorney General, city council members on the Minneapolis City Council, to the Minneapolis Mayor, Jacob Fry, tied to the Feeding Our Future fraud. Again, this is the fraud responsible for $250 million. 78 people have been indicted in that fraud alone. Just within the last few years, though, these charges, 90% of the federal charges have been against Somali business owners in Minnesota. But that does seem to be the frustration that this is just out in the open. It's now kind of become this online game, if you will, where people just check for different centers in their neighborhood, and you can see online very easily how much money they are getting from the federal government, and these calls to just get this to stop. And again, as you've mentioned, begin these.
Liz, let me jump in here because I want to. We do have some. Actually, we've got a response from Governor's office when we talk about the widespread fraud. Obviously, a lot of people are interested in whether or not he's going to be held accountable. And what he had to say is very interesting. His office claims the governor, quote, strengthened the oversight, launching investigations of their own and cracking down on these criminals, and yet hundreds of millions of dollars in alleged fraud continues to be uncovered. I mean, obviously the governor's looking for a third term here. I mean, do you think Minnesotans would actually give this guy another term in spite of this massive scandal? Surely this is the end politically for him.
Yeah, we are hearing that he is struggling to raise money in Minnesota. It's why we actually see him leaving the state quite often for fundraisers. We did some reporting that the last time around, and it was hard to find anyone during the presidential election that actually was going to vote for him back then. And now we have all of this this fraud and other things coming to light. The election will be in November, but you have to wonder, are they going to swap him out and put somebody else in to run as a Democrat here in Minnesota? But it seems to be, to me, after being a reporter in Minnesota now for nearly 20 years, that there's still a long way to go until November. And I'm not sure if he's going to be able to avoid this all much longer.
Billions of taxpayer dollars vanished in Minnesota, and the people in charge ignored it while it was happening. Fake daycares, fake autism centers, fake adult care programs, cash stuffed into suitcases and flown out of the state, all while politicians pretended everything was under control. And now the federal government suddenly wants to act shocked. The Small Business Administration cuts off grants. Homeland Security shows up. The FBI sends extra agents. They're calling it just the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg? This fraud has been sitting in plain sight for almost a decade. Leaders were warned. Reports were published. Whistleblowers spoke up. But the machine kept running because the money kept flowing. Meanwhile, Governor Tim Walz says he strengthened oversight. If that's true, how do we still end up with $9 billion in fraud and counting? You don't get numbers that big from one mistake. You get numbers that big from a system that refuses to police itself. And then there are campaign donations tied to some of the same networks being investigated. Money going to city officials, the Attorney General's race, and Minneapolis leadership. Tell me how that doesn't raise alarms. Here's where I stand. If you abuse government programs, steal taxpayer money, and commit fraud, you should be investigated, prosecuted. And if you gain citizenship to do it, you should lose it and be deported. Period. This is not about race or background. This is about criminals exploiting weak leadership, while honest Americans pay the bill. So the real questions are, who knew? When did they know? And why did they let it continue? If leaders won't protect taxpayer dollars, they shouldn't stay in power. Real audits, real consequences, no more excuses. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Governor Walz should be held accountable? Yes or no? And do you believe this kind of fraud is happening in other states too? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like so more people see this story. And subscribe if you want corruption exposed every time it happens.